So welcome to the Comprehensive Plan Update Committee. We have some guests here tonight, and I'd love to get started with that. So we'll start with introductions. Welcome everybody, and we'll be first introducing the committee, any city staff that's here, and then we'll go through the folks from the audience and just state your name. You can give a fun little fact about yourself if you want. But we want to get everyone on record. It'll be videotaped tonight and recorded, and that will all be published on the website. Okay, so let's start. We have
Sarah will be right back.
Sarah will be right back, so we'll start with you, Tom.
Tom Yeager, Country Vista.
Brad Gibson, Anthem Ranch.
Myron Cadock, Anthem Ranch.
Mark Hopkins, Anthem Ranch.
Susan Smith, Anthem Ranch.
Bob Pearson, Aspen Creek.
Tom Silvers, Wildgrass.
And Quinn, Country Estates.
David Taylor, The Outlook.
Sharon Tessier, Council.
Charles Ozaki, staff.
Anna Bergenzetti, staff.
Evan Stambridge, staff.
Sarah, would you mind introducing yourself for the record?
Oh, sorry. Sarah Mann, Anthem Highlands. Lois Bailey, Hawaii, Highlands.
Thank you. For the members of the public, do you mind starting over here, please? Lynette Vesco, Anthem Ranch.
Ed Young, Anthem Ranch.
I'm Matt Lepore. I'm the director of the COGCC. I live in Stanford. I don't think you care.
David Beacom, Council.
Jason Balling, Public Health Director, City and County of Brookfield. John Noto with COGCC.
Greg Garamo, COGCC.
Dana Engelfeld, I live in the Atlantic.
Neil Cave, I'm Brookfield resident. Becky McLeod, Anthem Ranch.
Jean Lynn, Wildgrass.
Chandler Duval.
Brian Chambers, Instructional Guest.
Hi, Eric Jacobson with Construction.
Eric Chris, Extraction.
Andrew Strutman on the Ballot Consulting.
Stephen Stillwell, Brookfield Public Health.
Public Health.
Steinberg, Anthem Ranch.
Bryce Steinberg,
And Bill Young, Wildgrass.
Would you mind introducing
Mike Shelton on the City Council.
Thanks. Great. Anyone else?
Tammy.
All right, got it. Miss Tammy.
Tammy Yongo, Director of Strategic Initiatives.
Thank you. And just also for the record, the committee has opted to have more of an open dialogue with the public participants who've come to be in the public. So there may be questions directed at experts who are sitting in on the conversation tonight. So tonight we have a presentation from COGCC, Matt Lepore, and we also have a home value analysis that will be brought by Dr. Ed Young, former senior economic analyst at USDA, and Pamela Sabri from REMAX. We just had a process advisory committee upstairs, and we wanted to give an update to the entire committee about what was discussed. So that meeting consisted of the process advisory committee, which are Pat Quinn, Bob Pearson, Susan Spees, and Anne-Marie Byers, who wasn't present tonight, as well as Extraction Oil and Gas, and Kevin Stanbridge and Charles Ozaki. So Susan, would you mind please giving a quick update to the entire committee about some of the discussions of the process advisory committee?
The main focus for tonight was to have an open dialogue with Extraction and the task force as to why we are asking so many questions of them, what we need from them, why we need things from them, and how can we have a collaborative process where we can get information from them and they can feel that we're not their adversaries, but we are trying to learn, as the analogy I used, we're trying to gather our education from a fire hose. We have a very short period of time, with the exception of Myron and Mark and Steve. We aren't engineers from the petroleum field. And so we need to learn as much as we possibly can in a short period of time in order to create guidelines for the city and county of Broomfield for any operator coming into Broomfield moving forward. And I think the first thing we wanted to do is to assure Extraction that our questions aren't meant to be adversarial. We're just trying to learn. Education is an extremely important aspect for what we are doing here as a committee. And we need to be able to make informed decisions. I think that was assuring to the folks from Extraction. We're looking for ways to collaborate, and we're looking for a way to develop meaningful guidelines moving forward for any potential operator. One of the things that Extraction expressed was frustration at not being able to complete the amended MOU. They've been trying to connect with the city folks and haven't been successful in doing so. And what we were able to share with Extraction was the city has been very respectful of the 14 of us as we begin to develop our guidelines moving forward for any operator, and they're waiting until we come forward with recommendations, which from every committee is beginning to formulate. And we know that Tabby and Kevin and many of the other staff members have been attending all of our committee meetings so that they already know the direction we're heading with recommendations. But once we have something more firmly developed, then the staff will be able to begin that negotiation with the amended MOU. Much of what we are developing right now already is in the existing MOU. That's, again, part of our learning process, to know what we need to enhance and augment. So I think that helped Extraction understand why they've not been able to get where they want to get. They would like to complete that MOU by the end of June. And I feel fairly confident as our committees are evolving and getting information, we'll have rough drafts, we'll have a pretty good idea of where we're going so that the city staff will be able to move forward with those negotiations with Extraction. And I don't think there are going to be many hard negotiations, because from what they were sharing with us, it sounds like we're really moving down the same direction. We're going to hear tonight from COGCC the difference between a spacing application and the detailed permitting application. We talked a little bit about that tonight in our meeting upstairs. But the long and the short of it, I think two really good things that came out of it. I think we were listening to each other. And that was important, that we understand that we're really trying to be collaborative with one another. And the second good thing I think Brian would say is he finally figured out what he needs to do to get the pipeline permits going through the city. So, and I think, I don't know where Brian is sitting, in the back. I think he would agree with that as being pleased with that bit of information. So that's my report.
Thanks, Susan. Anything to add, Pat or Bob? Where is it?
Well, I mean, having city council members here, I'll make a comment that, and I think, you know, that we're an advisory committee of the city council, and the city council provides the direction to the city manager, and we all understand that process. Right, Mike?
Any questions from the committee about that, what was discussed at the Process Advisory Committee? Okay, great. Jonathan?
I didn't introduce myself, Jonathan Barch. So let's start with Matt Lepore, Director of COGCC, permitting, spacing, and setbacks for siting. I think we'll also, as you heard, have a couple questions specifically. I don't know, is Greg going to present with you? Is Greg here?
Yeah, so maybe procedural question. I have a whole crew of subject matter experts with me. Many of them have presentation slides. that we would like to share with you to answer the questions and foster that dialogue. I want to be clear on time. We didn't realize there were other speakers scheduled, so tell us what we've got.
Okay, so we have till 9 o'clock. We have both speakers. How what we had anticipated was about an hour and 15. Direction from the committee last time was that they want to continue to ask you questions until that time, right? As facilitators, we're not going to cut you off on that, but we do want to make sure that we have time for both for Dr. Young and also Pamela. So what do you think in terms of is reasonable?
An hour and 15 is a great target,
Okay.
and
Great, come on up.
Questions take us
Yeah.
longer. So I think, yeah, we'll just move in mass if that's okay.
How many?
We can relocate the visual aids a little bit.
Tammy, quick question, help you with chewing. We have them coming back like May 17th, is that still the plan for the subsequent?
If necessary, we can ask for them to come.
Because we had topics on that were different from what they're expecting.
Right, right, so I think we'll have to ask them for sure, but we can have them back, they'll come back. Do you need a hookup to the laptop? But if you,
I don't
they
need
have
this
time to
laptop.
cover
I
those
think
topics.
what happens, patients have them on flash drives. So we have to do that.
get it queued up.
How do you want us to handle the Well, how does that start goes? They're separate than
Yeah, I think presentation first, and then you'll see questions if they're not on campus.
Okay, so good evening, everybody. Just kind of give you a sense of, I think, how we're going to approach this. So we had some general topics that we were asked to address, like spacing and cooling and so forth. And then we had sort of a longish list of specific questions. We're going to do the presentations first and address those broader topics. We'll see how that goes as far as time, and then if we can, we'll start with these questions, some of which we can answer and some of which we can't. But we'll do our best, all right? So Jane Stanzik is our permitting and technical services manager, and she's going to talk about spacing and cooling.
Yeah, like looking first. Ooh, okay, there we go. It just had to be really, really close to it.
Oh, wow.
I can turn this around for you, or I can, or you can just.
I can do it. Because Anna's gonna, she's like the slides. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jane Stanzik, and I am the manager of the Permitting and Technical Services part of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission. What I've put together is a really very, very basic presentation to explain spacing and cooling. So I'm using a very simplistic example. Like a lot of things, it's a little more complicated, but I think I have 10 or 15 minutes, so it's going to be a simplistic overview. So first, can you hear me in the back? Kind of over the crackling. So the statute does a lot of things. The Oil and Gas Conservation Act is one of the state statutes. It provided for the creation of the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission, It has a lot of things in it, but three of the things that it does, it sets up as responsibilities for the Oil and Gas Commission is to foster the responsible development of the state's oil and gas minerals. And an example of that fostering the responsible development, for instance, is minimizing surface disturbance. It charges the commission with protecting correlative rights, and that essentially says that every mineral owner has the opportunity to produce their minerals and receive their fair share of the profits from the oil and gas that they might own, and also to prevent waste. And waste is somewhat complicated, but a couple ways to look at it is that there are no unnecessary wells drilled. The number of wells is what's actually required to develop the oil and gas, and that at the same time, oil and gas is not left undeveloped, as in stranded or inaccessible for development. So with these three small pieces of what the Oil and Gas Conservation Commission does, the statute gives the commission the authority to establish drilling and spacing units, which takes care of, in many cases, these three responsibilities. So just to talk just really quickly about oil and gas ownership, minerals. Oil and gas are considered minerals, and the oil and gas in the subsurface beneath a given tract of land is the mineral estate of that tract. According to the commission, well, actually not the commission rules, well, the rules and the statute both say that if you own the minerals, it means you own the right to develop those minerals. That's what it means. And ownership can be by deed, just like you own your house. If you bought your home and you bought the minerals along with it, you own those minerals by deed. But mineral ownership can also be established by lease. If you own the minerals but you lease them to operator A, they now own them because they have the right to develop them. Of course, your lease has some stipulation that you'll receive royalty payments, but they have the right. Once you lease them, you can't drill your own well. Only they can drill the well. Or they could convey that right to another operator through some agreement, and then that other operator would have the right, the ownership of those minerals. So it's all really complicated, and that's as far as I can go with it. The boundary of the tract of land, if you own your home and you own the minerals in the rocks beneath it, just like you have a property line where you stop mowing your yard and your neighbor starts mowing their yard, in the subsurface, there's also a property line of where you own the minerals and where your neighbor owns the minerals. We call that a lease line, even though there may be no lease involved. So this is just kind of get us all on the same page. So when you see in the rules it talks about a lease line, it is talking about that property line in terms of mineral ownership in the subsurface. So I'm going to walk you through a really simplistic example to explain how spacing works. So Oil Company A has leased the minerals in a 2-acre lot in Weld County, and their plan is to drill a well to develop those minerals. And I think most people understand that the way a well develops, produces the oil and natural gas is that the oil and natural gas can actually move to varying degrees through the pore spaces of the rock. It moves to the well and up the wellbore, and that's how it's produced to the surface. And the distance away from the well that the oil is actually drained is called the drainage radius. And if the drainage radius extends beyond the lease line, then that well is draining someone else's minerals, and that's a violation of correlative rights. So one way for, if Company A was going to drill this well, and these other mineral owners wanted to protect their oil and gas from being sucked out through Company A's well, they could drill their own wells, and they would be then developing and producing their own oil. So that's one way to protect your rights and make sure you're capturing your own oil and gas. The next slide. But it would end up looking like this. And this is what things looked like before states like Colorado, created oil and gas conservation commissions. It was to stop that from happening, among other things, but that's one of the things. So go ahead. So a better way to do it is to create a drilling and spacing unit that's an appropriate size for what is actually going to be drained by a well. The advantages are that every owner has their oil produced and they receive the profits from the sale of that oil. Unnecessary wells are not drilled. The size of the unit is designed to be effectively drained by the well. And comparing this example of one well in that whole area to Signal Hill in California in 1930 or 40, you're minimizing the surface disturbance by having just the right number of wells. So the next slide. But the current reality is that in many oil fields in this country and other countries, and particularly here in the Wattenberg field, all the new wells are horizontal wells for the development of the Niobrara and Crodell formations. And the wells can be anywhere from a mile to 2 miles, even 2.5 miles in length. So in this picture, each of these is a governmental section, which means it's a mile square. And so I've got a couple scales there of a 1 mile bar and a 2 mile bar. So
Where is that?
that is in 5 North 62 West.
Where's that?
It's safe to say Weld County.
Yeah, it's that's east of here.
Farther north and west.
Yeah, north and east of here. Oh, this is Matt's help. This is the map on our website. Hopefully most of you that are learning and wondering about how oil and gas development works, you've looked at our map. If not, I encourage you to go to our website, pull up our interactive map. This is one of the things you can see. You can see many, many things on it. It's essentially, you could put in, you could pull it up. There's a zoom to feature so that you can navigate to the place you want to go. It starts with the whole state of Colorado. You can select cities as the criteria for searching and zooming. You can put in Broomfield. It'll take you right to Broomfield, and you're going to want to kind of back away because it takes you in a little too close. There are layers that you turn on to display what you want: wells, the directional wellbore paths, towns, roads, permits, pending permits. These are all approved. So just so you know, the green lines, that's a permitted well. That's the planned path for that wellbore. The purple ones have actually been drilled. So that's the actual trace path of that wellbore in the subsurface based on the directional survey from the well that's actually been drilled. The red dots are, of course, the surface location. If they have a yellow circle around them, they're producing. If they have a green color around them, they're just a permit, a planned approved permit. The pending applications for wells, instead of a red dot, it has a little blue square, and then the planned wellbore path is a blue color as well. Next. So the reality is that the development is with horizontal technology, and each well develops many, many leases. So in this picture, again, this is from our website, but I put the green lines in the red box around it. This is the aerial imagery that's available on our map on the website. You can see if you just look at surface features, fence lines, roads and such, those often coincide with surface property lines, which means they often coincide with subsurface. So you can see there's lots and lots of different mineral estates to be produced by a single well. Again, a spacing unit can facilitate this orderly horizontal development. Can we have the next slide? But the reality is that it takes many, many wells to develop and produce all the oil and gas. And that's because these formations, the Niobrara and the Crodell formation, are extremely tight, meaning they have very low porosity, very low permeability, but they still have lots of oil and gas in there, and the only way for it to come out is to use the technology of hydraulic fracture stimulation, and that allows the oil and gas to move from the rock to the wellbore and up to the surface. So this is a more reasonable picture of the reality of the development of these formations here in the Wattenberg field. Next slide, please. And the other thing that often is a kind of a result of having a drilling and spacing unit, that even without it still happens. Operators drill all these wells directionally, obviously, and they use large multi-well pads, so it reduces the amount of surface disturbance. Everything is consolidated. All the well heads are just in a row. In the subsurface, they take off and go miles and miles. And also they consolidate the production facilities on that surface location. Next slide, please. So drilling and spacing units, how do they come about? Well, the operators use geologic and engineering data to determine the drainage radius for the wells in the reservoir. They also use that, once they understand that behavior, those characteristics of the reservoir, then they can determine the appropriate setback from the unit boundary. Again, you have to protect relative rights. You can't produce the oil from outside the unit. It prevents waste in that if your setback is too far from the unit boundary, then there's oil and gas that's not being developed. But similarly, the appropriate setback between wells, the appropriate number of wells, so there aren't too many wells being drilled. It's all balanced out. When you think about the cost to drill one of these wells, an operator isn't going to drill wells they don't need. So they do their science and determine exactly how many wells it takes to produce the oil and gas that's in those formations in the subsurface. Next slide, please. And so this, again, on our website, you can go to the files for any given hearing, and in the hearing file for an order of the commission that creates a drilling and spacing unit, you will see the testimony that the operator has to submit with their application. This is an example of what the geologic testimony looks like. Geologists look at the well logs that are run, electric well logs run in existing wells. It tells them the thickness of the formations, the porosity, permeability of the formations. They create maps that describe that reservoir. A structure map tells you where the top of that reservoir is in the subsurface, and the isopac map tells you how thick that particular formation is in the subsurface. So the geologists map that all out. And next slide, Anna. And then the engineers look at the production data from existing wells, and looked at the production, the decline curve. They also, again, with the geologic technicians, they look at the porosity, permeability, and they do all sorts of calculations to figure out how much each well is going to produce. And again, that leads to getting the right number of wells with the right spacing between the wells and the appropriate setback from the unit boundary to protect relative rights. Next one. So, an operator that wants to have a drilling and spacing unit created by the commission has to file an application for a hearing before the commission. The requirement is only that they own the mineral rights. Like we said, they can own it outright through deed or a lease or through an operating agreement with someone else. There's no minimum percentage required. They just have to own some oil and gas rights within the area that they are requesting be designated as a drilling and spacing unit. They submit their application, they have an attorney submit it to the commission, and the folks at the commission that process all of those are the hearings group. There's a deadline. You can look at our website The hearing schedule is established a year in advance, and associated with each hearing, there are the deadlines for the submittal of the application. Every application has similar information within it, basic county, oil and gas field if there is one, the formations that are going to be spaced, a description of the application lands using quarter, section, township range, the size of the unit in acres, the number of wells to be drilled, the setback from the unit boundary, the setback between wells, and nowadays, the type of wells to be drilled. So in the Wattenberg field, they all say for the horizontal development of the Niobrara and the Codell. In other parts of the state, they're not drilling horizontal wells. Some of the formations aren't, that's not the best way to develop them, so they're still drilling vertical and directional wells. Next slide. The other thing that has to happen, actually, in conjunction, part of the application process is that all the mineral owners, again, owners that have the right to drill a well and produce the oil and gas, have to receive notice, all the owners within the unit. If they're going to, if their application is requesting a reduction of the setback distance from the unit boundary, they also have to provide notice to the people right outside that unit, again, the mineral owners. And the LGD is noticed, as well as the Colorado Parks and Wildlife and the Colorado Department of Public Health and the Environment.
Tell them what LGD is.
Oh, what? LGD is a local government designee, typically someone employed by a county or a municipality. The commission has an LGD program. And this is just an example. Our rules give the local government designee certain rights in terms of receiving notice, like in this case. It includes receiving notice of drilling permit applications, things like that.
In Broomfield's LGD is Tammy, so.
We just learned that a minute ago. Yeah.
Just for the record.
Yeah. Thank you. So along with the application, the testimony that I mentioned, the geologic and engineering testimony has to be included, as well as land testimony that certifies that the applicant does own some mineral interest within the proposed drilling and spacing unit. There's a protest process. So people that receive notice can protest the application. And if the resolution is not reached prior to the hearing, it'll be a contested matter that is actually heard by the commission with live testimony. Otherwise, if there's no protest, the commission makes their decision based on the written testimony. Again, land, geology, engineering. So the commissioners approve the application at the hearing. That creates the drilling and spacing unit. It takes a while to just administratively assign an order number and to get then the approved order posted on the website, but it does get there. And in Colorado, when an operator applies for a drilling and spacing unit and the commission creates that unit, it does not mean that that operator, the applicant, is the operator of the unit. It just means that they had an interest and they asked the commission to create the drilling and spacing unit. But they're not necessarily operator. Any person, any entity who owns a mineral interest within that drilling and spacing unit can drill wells. It just means that every well drilled within the unit has to meet the requirements of the order in terms of setbacks and the formations and such. Okay, next slide. So, back to a simplistic example. So here's those two sections that I showed earlier. So Company A has gone in and leased a bunch of acreage. That's the kind of faded yellow tan color. Some of the tracts were leased by another operator. Those are green. The blue represents lands that are leased by an operator that doesn't wish to participate with Company A's plans. And then there are some unleased minerals, and those are the yellow ones. Next slide, please. So, to walk through. So, Operator A, they applied and got a drilling and spacing unit approved by the commission. Before they did that, they had to at least acquire some leases. They continued leasing until they had acquired everything that was available. The remaining lands are either leased by other companies or unleased. Some of the other companies, Company A comes to them and says, hey, we've got this drilling and spacing unit, we are proposing to drill these wells, do you want to participate? There's, of course, yes we do, we've got those leases, we intend to develop them, we'll go with you, we'll work together. We'll be working interest partners. And that means that they will share they'll pay their share of the upfront costs to drill the well, as well as their share of the costs for the operation of that well, however long it exists, and then their share of the cost to plug the well and reclaim the site 20 or 30 years in the future. Some companies aren't interested in participating with Company A for whatever reason, and then there are unleased owners who don't want to lease their minerals, nor do they want to participate as a working interest partner. Next slide, please. So when wells are drilled, Company A and their working interest partners have to pay everyone within the unit their fair share. Otherwise, it's like stealing. I mean, so they're obligated to pay. It's a thing called division orders. They calculate everyone's percentage, all the mineral owners within the unit, and that determines how much of the profits they share in. But they can't afford, because of the costs necessarily, in my example, they can't afford to carry those non-consenting owners to pay their share. And so they come to the commission and they request that the commission pool all the interests within that drilling and spacing unit. And that's another tool that's by statute given to the Oil and Gas Commission, and it's a way of fostering the responsible development of the oil and gas minerals of the state. And along with the ability to pool those interests, there's a cost recovery and risk penalty associated with it. And what that means is that Company A and their working interest partners who paid up front to drill the well, they recover their investment. And the way that's dictated by the statute is that they recover 100% of their tangible costs, 200% of their intangible costs before the non-consenting owners get their full share of their profits. The operator A and their partners took a risk, made a huge investment, and so the statutory cooling in Colorado provides for that recovery and recognition of that risk. And that's similar in many states have it. They don't all have the same percentages. Some actually have 300%. So it's a very common element in oil and gas development. Next slide, please. So the pooling application. There are some preliminary requirements before an operator can submit their application. First of all, there has to be a spacing unit. The statute says that the commission can pool the interests within a drilling and spacing unit. So you have to get the unit first before you can do it. The operator, the applicant, has to have offered to all the non-consenting unleased owners an offer to lease and an offer to participate as a working interest partner. And that offer to participate has to include the actual cost to drill the well. So the mineral owner can make an informed decision. They can weigh the pros and cons of, do I lease to operator A and then receive a royalty based on whatever we agree to in the lease, or do I pay as a partner? And what kind of cost does that mean? And so that's why the operator has to provide a cost estimate. The non-consenting working interest partners, meaning the other operators that have acquired leases in the unit, they have to also receive that same offer to participate with that cost estimate again, so they can make an informed decision. And all that has to happen before the applicant asks the commission to pool the interests. So then the rest of the application is very similar to the application for an order, except that, in a next slide, the testimony, rather than the scientific testimony, the geological and engineering testimony, that's already been done in order to create the unit. What they have to testify is they certify that they have notified everyone and that they've made all those folks the offers, either the offer to lease or participate or the offer to participate. So that's the testimony. And there can be protests, and again, if there's a protest, it can be then heard before the commission with live testimony. I think nope, that's it. So.
Let's take questions.
Yeah. Go ahead, Susan.
Two questions. One, if COGCC's mandate from the state are those three elements that you mentioned in the beginning, responsible development, protecting the correlative rights and prevent waste of the state's oil and gas resources, there was a fourth mandate, and that was to preserve the health, safety, and welfare of the citizens and the environment, which you didn't have on your slide. In light of the Martinez decision by the Court of Appeals, how do you plan to ensure that you are going to, in future decisions, preserve the health, safety, and welfare? It's not a balance. That's first.
All right, so I will answer that question, but I want to know if there are questions on pooling and spacing first.
Right. Because in some ways what we could do is hold that question till the end as well in terms of, but pooling and spacing, focus, we'll make sure we don't lose that.
Okay.
Sarah.
Yes, yesterday there was a hearing on House Bill 1336 that deals with forced pooling, and more than one of the House representatives said that the COGCC has the jurisdiction and the ability to take into account justice and reasonableness when determining or authorizing forced pooling. So what is the COGCC's position on this, and how do you plan on taking into account reasonableness and justice in this situation in Broomfield?
The statute requires us to pool on terms that are just and reasonable. And in that context, the just and reasonableness pertains primarily to the right and ability of each mineral interest owner to develop their minerals, to be paid for their minerals, to get value for the minerals that they own. And the statute, the pooling statute is created, as Jane said, first to give unleased mineral interest owners an opportunity to enter into a lease if they want to. They get value by entering into the lease. They can participate in the well if they want to, which means they're a part owner in that well and in their proportionate share. If they own 180 acres, 120 acres out of a 1,200 acre unit, they participate at 10%. They pay 10% of the cost, they get 10% of the profit from the well. If they don't want to lease, don't have the money to participate, would be one scenario. Then they might choose to be pooled. When you're pooled, you immediately get a 1/8 royalty, so you're getting 12.5% of the value of everything that comes out of the ground from the first drop of oil. Then the other 7/8 of your interest is what is used to pay the operators or the people who put their money up front. You pay them back out of that 7/8. So again, as in that position, you don't go out of pocket. If the well doesn't produce enough oil to pay for itself, you lose nothing. The people who put up the money don't get their money back. If the well pays out, it covers its costs, that's when you become a participant in the well, just as if you put in all your money up front. And that leads to issues that I know have been raised about the liabilities that might go with being an interest owner, and I can talk about that too. To me, that's the reasonableness and justness, is that everybody gets those opportunities. One way in which somebody might say, well, wait a minute, I was offered a lease at 7%, and I know that is not the going rate. So I'd like to lease, but I'm not leasing at 7%. That's a reasonable basis for a protest. Another protest we see is, I want to participate actually. Maybe I'm one of the operators in Jane's example. I've got a small interest in that acreage, so I'd like to participate. But, big oil company A is telling me that's a $12 million well. Well, I think that well can be drilled for 8, and I'm in at 8, but I'm not paying 12, or my share of 12. That's another protest basis that we see. So I know, of course, that there are mineral interest owners in Anthem Ranch and maybe Wildgrass who own their minerals who would want to say, we just don't want our minerals developed at all. We'd like to leave it in the ground or whatever. So the pooling statute, Colorado's pooling statute is based on pooling statutes that date back to the 1920s, late 1920s, early 1930s. There's a slide that might help illustrate this if we can find it. It was kind of the different colored blocks within the unit.
Oh,
No, there you go. So Jane has here the blue would be unleased mineral interest owners. All right, so that's some of you in Anthem Ranch, you own your minerals, you haven't leased to anybody, and you're saying, why can't I leave it in the ground? And the short answer that's been around for a long time is that then by saying no, if this person says, I don't want my minerals developed, then what happens is that nobody in the entire unit gets their minerals developed. So you're giving one entity a veto. Push the red button. You have to be smarter than the technology. You're giving one person a veto over all the rest. And I understand how you can say, well, that should be how it is. But again, in Colorado, in virtually every oil and gas producing state in the nation, that's not what the statute does. The statute says they get an opportunity to participate in different ways, to lease, et cetera. And if they don't want to do that, then the minerals are going to be developed. You are going to get paid. You're going to get paid in the statutory manner.
Follow up on that though, considering reasonableness and justness, what if the least non-consenting operators are the gold instead of the blue? Because my understanding is that Colorado does not have a minimum requirement for forced pooling. So wouldn't that be unreasonable and unjust to force that many people to pool? Does the COGC weigh anything like that?
So does everybody understand the question? Yes. Okay, terrific. I think the answer is that yes, if that were the case, those mineral interest owners could and should come to the commission and say, time out, we've got a 10% owner who wants to space and pool all of us, we're not interested. Commission, you need to take that into account. And part of that would depend on the where those folks were. So you said the kind of the mustardy color would be the unleased that didn't want to lease. All right, so here, that's a big block of land, okay? And an operator could drill around that. So let's just say for fun that these guys don't want their minerals developed, these guys do. All right, we can do that. We can do a different spacing unit so that these guys can say no, and these guys can say yes. And I think if that situation arose, you should bring that protest to the commission. And I know that's well, I shouldn't say I know. I suspect that's what's on people's minds. That's just not what we see in reality. What we see in reality is operators coming forward who typically have, I don't know, I don't want to say that we have this data exactly, but 1%, 2%, 10%, 15%, 20% owners are not coming to us and saying, we're going to pool the other 80%. If I had to ballpark it, I'd say it's minimum 30% and probably pushing 50% ownership in most cases. And then I would say that the operators, and there are some operators here, they can talk to this if they want to, they would rather have people leased than be forced pooled, for the most part, or participate. The one other factor I'll throw in here is that Jane mentioned maybe this is a $12 million well. If you're a 10% owner and you're going to force pool everybody else, you're coming up with $12 million for every single well without anybody else pitching in. And again, we just don't see that very often. It is theoretically possible. And we've seen one or two cases where a smaller operator with a smaller position is trying to leverage a bigger mineral lease owner, like an 80% owner, like the 20% guy comes in and says, let's space it, let's pool it, and 80% going, whoa, 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 I mean, you don't want to pool me. And it's that kind of, but it's kind of a leverage battle between operators.
Pat, and then Brad.
Well, first of all, a question, are you gonna do a separate presentation on the two-way applications?
Yeah, so this is just spacing and cooling right now, okay?
Yes, that starts at 11 p.m.
Brad?
No,
Do you have a spacing and cooling question for Pat?
Yeah, I did want to make it, I mean, it just seems to me, because I guess I wasn't aware of it, not that I'm that much of an expert, but when you take like wild grass, where for whatever reason, the Archdiocese didn't strip the minerals, which they probably should have, and you've got a whole bunch of homeowners, I mean, and you don't have any minimum requirements, the operator's at a great advantage. I mean, they don't really have to do an arm's length, if you got them surrounded, an arm's length negotiation. So requiring some type of minimum percentage, and you use the number 30%, might not be a bad idea. And I know that that's what the legislature is struggling with right now, but I mean, in order to have the homeowners in this circumstance have certain amount of leverage, having some minimum percentage would make sense.
I would tell you that I think that's a policy decision that the legislature is grappling with, and and the bill that was read and amended yesterday, they stripped out the minimum percentage requirement.
I understand that.
And you're just suggesting that would be a...
Yes.
So Brad, go ahead.
One thing I learned here was about the J sands formation, which is below the target that extraction is going after. And that's mostly natural gas, I guess. And so with regard to your charge of not leaving any minerals undeveloped, they don't plan to develop the J sands minerals. So how does that fit in with what your responsibility is to make sure that they're not leaving minerals undeveloped?
Well, the operator comes with Niobrara and Codell spacing. The development of the Niobrara and Codell is independent from the development of the J-sand. So it does not preclude that. And the same operator or another mineral owner who has the rights to the J-sand and the D-sand, they could come in the same lands and say, and again, present the geologic and engineering testimony that supports what they propose as the best way to space and develop the J-sand. Having one reservoir developed doesn't preclude the development of another.
So they would then have to find another location, obviously, for those wells?
Our rules would push them towards co-development on the same location.
Later on?
Right. And I mean, I think Jane points out, it could be a different operator, there could be a different lease, and I don't know here at all, but there are situations where the lease for the J-sand is completely different lessee than the Codell Niobrara. They might not want to develop the J-sand with horizontal wells, it could be directional wells. We would have potentially different spacing for the J-sand, so while that picture is a 1280, gas, J-sand might be 320s. That would depend on the engineering and geology.
And that actually has existed for many, for decades in the Wattenberg. There is spacing for the J-sand and there's separate spacing for the Niobrara Codell.
A couple more follow-up, two more. So Sarah and then Susan, and cooling spacing?
Yes.
Okay. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was the word liability just slipped right through your presentation there. If someone is forced pooled, or even if someone says, I don't want to be an investor, but okay, I'll sign the lease, you can take my minerals, why are they liable should there be an accident, heaven forbid?
If you've leased your minerals, you don't have any liability. You have sold the right to develop and produce that oil and gas. Your only relationship with the producer, the person you lease to, is a royalty, a rental
So if
and a
you try to
royalty.
put that liability in a lease,
No, it's
you
not.
should reject that.
Yes.
Yeah.
You should check that.
Okay, that answers my question, that's fine.
Okay, good.
Oh, let her finish it though. The other people who have not consented, why do they have the liability?
So,
Forced pool people.
yes,
They're forced
because
pool.
you're involuntarily pooled, as Matt described, through the pooling action by the commission, you essentially become a working interest partner, involuntarily. You were given the offer to do it voluntarily or to lease. You chose neither. What the pooling does is say that you now are a partner, and as Matt explained in more detail than I did, you receive a royalty right up front, right from the very beginning. The rest of your share is taken by the folks that paid all the upfront costs, they recover their costs. Then you receive your full share, and along with that, you would share in the operating costs and the eventual cost to plug, abandon the well, and reclaim this site. We had a question this morning in Rifle, the same thing. And I'm not an oil and gas operator, and whether an oil and gas operator actually goes to the unleased, non-consenting pooled partners for operational costs and then eventually plugging costs, you'd have to ask an oil and gas operator. Doesn't come before the commission. We're not involved with that part. The statute provides for how that happens, and then it just happens.
So I want to be really clear. If you are forced pooled and the well pays out and the other operators who put their money up get paid back, we call it back in as a working interest owner. You are theoretically liable for your share of costs. So if there's an environmental catastrophe that costs $7 billion to clean up, you have some legal liability for that. That is a fact.
Counterintuitive.
So you're forced to give up your property rights, and then you have potential liability if there is some catastrophic event.
You can characterize it that way if you want to.
But in reality, you're not giving up your property rights, you're compensated for the sale of your property. You didn't give it.
Semantics. You're being forced to sell your property rights.
Okay, so let's move on.
Well,
If that's
wait.
go ahead,
There's
Sarah.
more question.
Sure.
How does the just and reasonable come into that?
Again, as Matt explained, the just and reasonable, if you read the statute, it says just and reasonable share, that what it means is that you get your share. That the calculation of the division orders recognizes your percentage and you get your fair share of the proceeds from the development and sale of your oil and gas.
So half is just and reasonable, it sounds like, as if, I'm still confused. Okay.
300%, 100% to tangible costs, 200% to intangible costs?
Yes.
So a lot of that supposed money you would be getting as an owner really covers a lot of the cost of the company or the operator.
Only for that well. So for an oil company to drill one of these wells, they have a large staff. The staff works on the testimony. They pay to have the land spaced. They pay staff to design the wells. They pay staff to design the fracture stimulation. They pay staff to design the production layout, the facilities, the pipeline, all of that. They prepare applications, not just to submit to the commission for a drilling permit and a location assessment, but any other permits that are involved. All of those intangible costs are what it takes to drill a well. The tangible costs, and then the cost to drill the well, the drilling rig, everything. The
So why is
tangible,
it 200% of the intangible costs rather than 100%?
It's recognizing that they took a financial risk, that they paid all of that money before they even turned to the right, before they even started drilling that well, before they got anything out of that well. The tangible costs are the production facilities, the wellhead, all of that, that should the well be unsuccessful, they could take those tangible, that equipment and use it for another well or sell it. It still has value. But all those intangible costs, they're gone. There's no recovering them except through a productive.
Being a county, I'll just make one comment on that, is that, when you have your joint operating agreement, which is standard, in the industry, that 200% is on the low side, so the 200% is a general number out there. Most often you see 300% for non-consent penalties, and so the comment of the 200 to 300% is pretty industry standard. In fact, 200 would be on the low side of what I've seen.
Right, and some states have 300.
Right.
So I just want to, everything that we've described to you is in the statute, right? This is not something that we can
You can't negotiate.
change or adjust or make different. Again, policy questions, and I have had conversations with legislators about the liability for folks who are pooled by statute. I think that's a fruitful area for conversation with your legislators about changing that. They could change that with the stroke of a pen. They're going to have to go through the legislative process and talk to the lobbyists and all of those good things. But for those fractional shares, especially for someone who does not make an affirmative choice, right? The concept is you're given choices. You're given the choice to lease, the choice to participate. If you don't make either of those choices, option 3 is what we've described to you. If you don't make a choice, there's a legislative solution to backing into that ownership and backing into that liability. But that is not something that is in the COGC's hands.
So I'm just going to do the time check thing here, because there's more. We heard loud and clear. You want to be able to ask as many questions as you want, and at the same time you want to be out by 9 o'clock. We have invited other folks, and so we're just struggling a little bit in terms of just wanting to make sure that both of those things happen.
Yes. Jane, could I ask one question on the spacing permit? Does it only affect the subsurface spacing, or is there any approval in there as to the number of wells or the well location?
The locations? It depends.
Or the number of wells?
Well, yes, it does talk about the number of wells in the subsurface. That's part of that whole engineering and geology. What's the optimum number of wells to efficiently develop all that oil and gas within that unit? And so it includes the number of wells frequently. And in some cases, it does stipulate no more than X number of surface locations. The thing is, in the greater Wattenberg area, the Rule 318 capital A provides for the surface locations, and it actually provides for a very, very large number of surface locations. So
I'm going to ask everybody else to hold your questions until we'll come back to those, but let's make sure that we have a chance to hear the presentation. Can we do that?
Okay, we're going to do permitting next.
Someone Broomfield presentation or engineering review? This is Broomfield.
All right, this is for the Form 2 and 2A. I'm going to start with going through some of the website that Jane discussed. Sorry, I'm Rebecca Treats. I'm an oil and gas location specialist with the COGCC. Next slide. So this is the webpage. So this is the home page. As Jane said, there's a lot of things that can go on here. Regulation, the yellow bars under there. On here we have anything that's going on, hearings, forms, if there's been a location that has an extension for public comment period. Government, you can find contact information for LGDs. We also have the dashboard. You can look up complaints in an area, or if you want to file a complaint. We have our orders and policies and the maps. So next slide. So here are all of our rules that come up. Next slide. So under the permits, you can look up by county for location to find all the permits that are in process for that county. Next slide. There are not any permits in process right now in Broomfield, so I have Weld County here. The blue you can click on, which will take you to a link. This is for our e-forms. If you click on any of the in-process document numbers. Next slide. Here, when you're in there, you can look at any of the attachments as well as the permit, the Form 2 or 2A. This will give you see where locations are. This is also where public comments can be made. Next slide. So then we also have the daily activity dashboard, which has a lot of information. You can get LGD. Next slide. Here is pending permits. Again, this links to any of the attachments and further documentation for those, and it can be filtered by county, and it up here is all the 2s, 2As. If you click down, there's multiple pages that you can see spill reports, production reports, well status, various things. Next slide. And then we do have our map that Jane referenced. Next slide. So here you can zoom to, that's usually on the top. Next. And so here is Broomfield. Along the left side are all the layers that you can click on. All of the red dots on here, so I have the aerial turned on, as well as the yellow here is the city of Broomfield. These are permitted well locations, so they might not be active. This is producing as abandoned, and that if you want to see more on like what they are, it's over here. We have pending permits, well status, and that will give you more information just so you can see more specifics for locations. So now I'm going to go over the rules and permitting. We are kind of a unique state that we have 2 permits. We have the downhole for the 2, and then we have the 2A, which is the surface. So our 100 series is our definition. So these are just a summary of we have our location, which is any ground disturbance, surface disturbance for oil and gas. We also have our designated setback locations. This is 500 feet for an exception zone, 1,000 feet for a buffer zone, and 1,000 feet for a high occupancy building unit and designated outdoor activity area. So a building unit is different from a building. This is something that has a certificate of occupancy. This is usually residential, apartment, commercial space such as Walmarts, stores, or as well as warehouses. We also have our urban mitigation, which is 22 building units or 1 high occupancy building unit within that 1,000-foot radius of the location, or 11 for half. Out of the 2015-2016 rulemaking, we have the large urban mitigation area, which was 8 new wells or a total of 4,000 barrels of storage on the location. Next slide. So our Form 2, once again, this is overview. This is the 300 series, 303A. This is your downhole. This is your permit to drill. To re-enter or recomplete, there's 1 well. This is based off spacing orders and your right to construct. Next slide. And this is what a Form 2 looks like. This is the first page. All of the permits are multiple pages long, so there's more information on there. Next. So then we have the surface location, which is our Form 2A. This is any new oil and gas location. This is expanding an oil and gas location, adding a new well or pit, or any substantive changes to that location. So next slide. this is kind of the process of when, for the operator, they do the pre-planning, they have to get their spacing orders, they have to get their lease agreements, they have to look at the geology and the seismic data and all of that. This can take years. They have to, before the 2A comes in, they have to send out notifications to all building units and surface owners 30 days before that permit comes to COGCC, a minimum of 30 days. During that time, the operator can meet with neighbors, with the LGD, with the town, local governments, HOAs, anybody that wants to have a meeting. And then after that 30-day time period, they will submit their permit, their 2 and their 2A, to COGCC. And that's when we start the technical review. During the technical review, there is back and forth between the operator and staff. There is also, if there's any consultations that are needed with Parks and Wildlife, that are needed with CDPHE, any other negotiations, if the operator of the town, anybody wants to sit down and talk, there's a lot of negotiations and discussions and understanding during this time period. That's also when the public comment period can happen, that you can go on the webpage to put on public comments. When all of that is done, it can go through and be approved. Next slide. So again, the 2A is the surface, and the 2 is the downhole. So when we're looking at the 2A, we have some of the same information that we will do matching to make sure everything is correct between the 2 and the 2A, as well as, there's some different information between the permits. So we look at the location, we look at the equipment that's going to be there, we look at the time, we look at land use. This can have the consultation that we will talk to Parks and Wildlife and CDPHE and the government. We also look at the cultural distances. This is the distance of the well and the facility to the building units, roads, railroads, schools, various things. And so from that, if it's within that designated setback location, that can determine whether it's in an exception zone, a buffer zone, which can go add attachments, additional information, 23 best management practices, and notifications to all of the people that would be in that area. Next slide. So this is a Form 2A. It looks similar, but next. Setbacks. So there's different setbacks. We have safety setbacks that are statewide and are fairly firm. This is a minimum distance of 200 feet from buildings. That is a safety setback. We also have a minimum of 150 feet from the property line. And then in 605, tanks and fired vessels have a minimum of 200 feet from buildings, and then tanks, based off of the size, can have a minimum distance to property lines. Next slide. So, and then we have our designated setback locations. These setbacks are not, that doesn't mean with the 500-foot boundary, you can have a well between 200 and 500 feet. There can also be a well between 500 and 1,000 feet. It just means that it's in that designated setback, exception, or buffer zone location. So that requires more mitigation measures, more notification, involvement with the government, and more discussions. So before I go on, the exception zone is, we do not see a lot of exception zone locations. They are, I don't think the operators are keen on them. The times we do see those is based off of agriculture, and the building, the surface owner is requesting the well be near their house, so they're not disturbing their agricultural land. A lot of times if you have your irrigation circles and stuff, they don't want to disturb their irrigation. So that is, like I said, they're not common. Buffer zones we see more of, but once again, they're really scrutinized. When we're looking at the two, engineering looks at this, we work with the inspection unit, so when they go out, they know what kind of mitigation measures they should be expecting to see, what we can have out there, what is gonna be the lowest impact possible to nearby building units or, wildlife or, any criteria when we're looking at that. We really do, like I said, scrutinize it. And we do work with all of the groups. It's not just one person flipping through and looking at it. We talk amongst all of the groups, and it's a pretty involved process. And the time for a buffer zone or an exception zone is significantly longer than a location out east in the Boontillies.
Let's see if they want to ask questions about permitting before you make a
Sorry.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea. Permitting, yeah, Byron.
Can you give us a clear delineation on certain terminology? Because everybody knows you're constructing facilities, you start a drilling process, completions, and then production. But with introduction of hydraulic fracturing, snubbing, coiling, different people put different specific activities into different buckets. Try to understand how Colorado Oil and Gas Commission treats all of these various activities, starting with constructing the pad and its facilities, all the way through the process where you've gone past flowback and the well's on production. Yeah, technically it's a small unit, there's nobody on board, everything's being handled remotely because you're in production. Can you talk about terminology, what terms go in what bucket, things like that?
So we have, for like the facility when you have the drilling, that is the drill rig going on, then after the well is drilled, they'll come back and do the fracturing and stimulation. From that, the flowback can last a longer period of time. From flowback, they monitor to know when it becomes saleable, and when it becomes saleable, then it is into production, from the flowback stage to production.
So the operator says, I'm done, the operator gets the call when he's done with flowback, I'm now in production, and then production permits go into effect.
And we can help with that. The 2A is the permit that they get for the entire location and the entire life cycle, basically, of the activity, from drilling to completions to production. And, well, yeah, starting with construction. We will put conditions of approval on a 2A, depending on where it is, that an operator must turn their gas, immediately down line for sign of saleable gas, so that we're not wasting the gas or flaring it or unnecessarily burning it. As far as the permitting goes, it's all permitted up front. There are conditions built into the permit for different phases, and that's what our inspectors will follow up on. We do stick to real basic, complete construction, drilling, completions, and production.
But in terms of lining up different permits from different agencies, so for example, CDPHE, their permit starts at production.
That's right.
Do they have the same definition of production, which is at the end of flowback when the operator certifies, I'm done, I'm now into production? Is that something that your permit, CDPHE permits, and any other permits align? Or is every agency possibly a little out of sync of how they label things?
As John said, there's one permit. So there's the 2A, which is for the location. The drilling permit is to drill and operate that well. We don't require any other permitting for the phases. It covers that well from the time you drill it until you plug it. When a well is completed, the operator submits a Form 5A, which is called a completed interval report. They also submit a Form 5, which is a drilling completion report. On the Form 5A, they have to report to us the first day of production. And that date that they report to us on that particular form is what CDPHE relies on for their date of first production.
Does that help?
I wanted to clarify something, it's possible I misunderstood it. It's the 200-foot setback from public roads per well, not per pad. Is that in all cases? Or was that in?
Yes.
Okay, all wells always
Well,
have to be 200 feet from?
Statewide, when that rule went into effect. So there are potentially wells out there that are closer.
Oh, sure, but from the point the rule was made forward?
Yes.
It's 200 feet from a public road, a utility line, did you say?
Correct.
Overground or underground?
Above ground.
And what was the third thing?
Buildings?
Well, I thought buildings had to
Railroad.
be 500 feet.
No.
Building unit. Describe building unit.
So a building unit is a residential, and a building can be like or something that's fit for occupancy. It is different from a barn, which is a building, or a detached garage, that way.
Okay, thank you.
What do you measure from the middle of the pad or from?
From the well itself,
From the
or the
well,
other equipment.
or the tank? So if there's 40 wells, the nearest well?
Mhm.
Other questions? Yeah, go ahead, sir.
Do you happen to know on average how many permits are approved and like percentages, how many are approved and how many are denied?
Annually?
Just on average.
So, when we find permits that do not seem to be consistent with our rules or complying with our rules, what we do is notify the operator and we'll explain what we think is wrong. And then they have, well, we sort of have two paths now. What that path is, there are problems with this permit. They don't meet setbacks, they don't meet other legal requirements. They typically withdraw those permits. So they don't get to a place where they just push them forward and say, look, I don't care, we think it does, we disagree, and we go fight about it. They usually withdraw those permits. So I can get you numbers, which I just gave to the legislature, about how many permits get withdrawn each year as compared to how many are approved. It's about 10% that get withdrawn. So if we get we get 2,500 permit applications, give or take 250 will be withdrawn by the operator. In addition, more recently, we began saying to operators, this happens, this doesn't even come close to meeting our requirements for a permit. The numbers don't match, the attachments don't match, the attachments are missing. We reject those permits. So starting, I think, in 2016 is the first year that we have statistics for rejected permits. In terms of a permit coming all the way through the system and then us saying we're going to deny this, that just doesn't happen because we work with the operator to get them to meet the requirements of our rules. There have been a couple of examples fairly recently where I said to an operator, even if you can meet the requirements legally, I'm not going to approve that permit. And their choice then is to go to the commission. So the commission acts as the appellate body for a decision at the staff level. So if I deny that permit for whatever reason, or just tell them I'm not going to approve it, they can take it to the commission and have the commission decide. And all of those numbers, permits submitted, permits approved, permits withdrawn, are all in our staff reports. So every time we have a commission hearing, we publish a staff report, and about page 25 of that staff report, you can see applications withdrawn, approved, in process, etc. And all of that is on the web page under library, staff reports.
Litigation.
All right, so if a location is within the designated setback location, this is some of the mitigation measures. There are between 20 and 30 mitigation measures. So I'm just touching on some of the nuisance ones that seem to be of higher concern. So, but there are others. So we have our statewide, which is the rule 805 for odors and dust. Odors are during drilling, the fracking and stimulation of the well, the flowback, and then to the production, which, so we look at that, and then if it's within a designated setback location, we have emission control systems that are required for the location. Dust, that is also a statewide. COGCC has authority to regulate dust on the lease road and on the location, but not on public roads. So there's mitigation measures such as water, reducing speeds, if it's for during fracking and stimulation, sandboxes can be used. There's a wide variety of ways to control dust. Next slide. Noise, again, we have our 802, which are statewide, and this is, we have permissible levels that are outlined in the rules. This is based on land use and zoning, and it is measured at 350 feet from the location. Then if it's in a designated setback location, 604C2A comes into play, and that is during the drilling rig is for the light industrial zones, which is outlined in 802. The 604C2A is where we are looking for mitigation to reduce the sound levels. This is putting up sound walls and hay bales, and berming, landscaping, that kind of thing that can help lower those sound levels. Next slide. And then we have lighting. Our lighting is under 803. Our requirements are for it to be directed downward, inward, and shielded. Some of the things we have seen when in designated setback locations are the sound walls. If being taller, they help shield some of the lights. We've seen shrouding on the rig, and we've seen LED lights used, which do decrease any glare and going off the side. And that is what I have.
Yeah, Pat.
I'm trying to understand the, in terms of the applications that may be forthcoming to the commission, so the spacing application, the number of wells, by definition are considered in the spacing application because you're trying to get the ideal, extraction of the resource. But the location of those wells, or the surface location of those wells are not necessarily set during the spacing. They don't have to be set during the spacing application.
That is correct.
Okay. And so if an operator wanted to separate its spacing applications from its 2 and 2A applications, then for example, and this committee might want to talk about alternative locations. We might want to talk about the number of wells on per pad, stuff like that. That would be part of the 2 and 2A application, and not necessarily the spacing application.
That's correct.
Those are two independent issues.
Right. What's important in the spacing application are obviously the lands included, and then the number of wells that that applicant intends to drill.
Okay.
And as Jane said, we do like to say not more than X surface locations.
Okay.
But under existing rules modeled mainly on vertical development, allow 5 well locations per quarter mile, so 20 per mile. 20 well locations per square mile are allowed under our rules. So if you're looking at 1,280 acre spacing units, theoretically, an operator could ask for 40 locations.
Right.
That doesn't happen anymore because of horizontal development.
Right.
The proposal that Extraction has been talking about is a single pad for actually 4 square miles. Right?
Well, it was my understanding that they're talking about 4 different pads.
4 different pads to develop 4 square miles each, so 16 square miles.
Okay, I see what you're saying. Okay. So with this, but there is a distinction between the spacing application and
Yes.
the 2 and 2A application.
Yes.
Okay. So then my next question is, and Matt, you had said something that at the forum about, you know, encouraging local governments and stuff to come to the commission, you know, to have their concerns heard. At least I thought I heard you say that. And so what standing does a local government have when you go to, I mean, if we have rules that are different than yours, or, you know, or zoning requests or whatever, what did you, were you, cause my wife interpreted what you said differently than I did.
She's right.
Right. So I'm curious what you meant, and what standing does the city have, or, you know, what standing does the city have if we came to you with specific requests that we may not be able to negotiate through an MOU?
Okay, so yeah, I want to try to answer that sort of holistically. So one of the things that the commission has done over the last few years, and particularly through the task force, is try to push operators to engage more earlier with local governments, so that local governments get their concerns and issues out on the table with the operator before the operator comes to us. So from my vantage point, the process you are going through right now and that Extraction is engaging in with you right now is fantastic. Okay? And so you mentioned the MOU. The MOU has been a very, very effective tool for local governments to try to, and many times successfully, reach agreements with operators about things that go beyond our rules that are important to the local jurisdiction. And you have that, then you enter into an MOU, and that's a contractual relationship.
Right.
So by contract, operator X has agreed to do monitoring of air once a month, whether our rules require it or not, okay? I want to add to that if there is one of those agreements in the MOU of a topic that is within our jurisdiction, we will incorporate that agreed condition into our permit, into our drilling permit, or possibly our location permit. Then it becomes enforceable by us, okay? So I think that's important for everyone to understand. These things that you negotiate, that Extraction agrees to, that you put in your MOU, as long as it's something that we have jurisdiction over, we will bring that in as a condition of the permit, right? One of the things that goes beyond the permitting that we have the right to do on a site-specific basis are those conditions of approval. So the reservoir is an issue here, right? Proximity to the reservoir, and you're uphill or they're uphill or whatever. All right, that's a site-specific circumstance. We don't have rules that contemplate that specific circumstance globally. We do that by specific conditions of approval. Now, you might want to negotiate something with Extraction. You can try that. Let's just say, to answer your question, Pat, that fails. You want Extraction to put 65 monitoring wells between their location and the reservoir. And they say, sorry. All right. You can then bring that concern to us as the local government. Through your local governmental designee, I mean, we're pretty receptive to the local governments. If Charles wants to call, if Kevin wants to call, if Tammy wants to call as local government, they participate in our public comment process, okay? But we sort of treat them as super uber public commenters because we assume that they're representing the people, right? I don't say that publicly very often. But you know, again, that doesn't mean I'm going to say yes, 65 monitoring wells is a great idea, but at least I hear your concern and understand your concern, and we talk as I would assume Extraction would about what mitigation measures do make sense, and some probably do.
Bob, and then we're going to move on.
Your Rule 802 for noise abatement, I think says that in the particular example here, the wells would be in a residential, agricultural, or rural area, so the noise standards for that zone would apply, except for drilling or completion or stimulation, which would be in the industrial zone. Am I reading that right? That if you, in consultation with Tammy, decide that this well pad's in a residential zone, that the drilling still would be have to meet an industrial noise standard during drilling?
If it is in a buffer zone or an exception zone.
So tell what that is one more time.
Okay, so if it's within that 500 or 1,000 foot setback, if the location is within 1,000 feet of a building unit, then it has to meet the light industrial.
Okay, so Rule 602 kicks in at that point.
Yes.
Okay.
Right.
That's right. And the other question I had was with regard to air quality. It looks like your air quality requirements are all summarized, or actually stated in Section 805, is that correct?
We also, again, if it's in the designated setback,
Okay.
it goes there is some in the 602, 604 C2 capital C.
Okay. And the CDPHE air quality rules only come into play once the well is put into production. So if you have a pad with multi-wells, some of which are still being drilled or developed versus some that are in production, how do you co-share responsibilities between CDPHE on who has jurisdiction?
So we, Greg Durallo, Environmental Manager at COGCC. COGCC and CDPHE have a very cooperative relationship with Air Pollution Control Division at CDPHE. We actually have quarterly meetings with their technical staff, and we have that overlap all the time. And our inspectors will call their inspectors will call our inspectors. We respond to complaints in a joint manner. So we don't have any sort of problems negotiating that. I mean, if we find that the source, if we both arrive at the site and we find that the source is a well that is still in flowback, then APCD is going to look at us and say, it's all you. If we find that it's a source that's in production, then we're going to look at them and say it's all you.
Okay, thank you. I'm done.
Okay, next. We're at, is there a next piece?
Yes.
How many more?
Engineering?
Engineering.
Engineering.
That's the last one.
Engineering, then we can try to answer the questions.
That's probably the other one.
This is engineering.
I
Next
was able to
slide.
guess on that one.
My name's Stuart Ellsworth, the engineering manager at the commission. What I'd like to just briefly talk about is sort of how we look at the downhole part, aquifer protection, wellbore integrity, and sort of our special review as far as horizontal well. I understand you've already spoken with Dr. Fleckenstein, so you already have sort of a perspective. So what I'm going to do is kind of give you our perspective on that. So next. Downhole, next. In general summary, what we're looking for is two main parts to where a wellbore is constructed. We want to have the surface casing protect and isolate the aquifers. That surface casing, that steel, the large one I have over there, it does other things like holds the wellhead, and so it has some strength but ultimately the way we look at it is we want to isolate that aquifer. And then the second piece of the puzzle, or that middle piece of steel, is what we call the production casing. So if you go to the next slide. So what I've got here is the first, is this piece right here, which we call the surface casing. So they'll drill that down. Roughly speaking, we're looking for that to be 1,200 feet deep. But we're looking to cover the known aquifers. And so the depiction I have here is the aquifer, and that red line there is this surface casing. And to give you an idea, it's roughly about 1/4 inch. It's actually 5/8 of an inch thick. And all this steel is going down below. And of course, it's going inside of the wellbore that they drill. And inside of that, they'll put this cement. Cement. I don't want you to think about concrete at the surface. Those are two totally different things. If you're all involved in general construction, you might think of this, here, I'll just pass it around to you, take a look. You might think of it more as grout. But its objective is to seal off any fluid flows. That's the goal of this. And of course, here in the general eastern part of the Front Range here, we have 5 different aquifers. The deepest one is the Fox Hills. And I'll show that in a second. The next piece of this puzzle is the fact that after they've sealed off and placed the cement in, they'll come in and now we'll drill all the way down to their producing horizon. I'm showing a vertical well, but just imagine when you get to the bottom, they're just going to turn it and run along that along this hydrocarbon zone in the horizontal. But again, they're going to place this steel all the way down. Again, we're kind of a 1/4 of an inch thick steel, and that's going to go all the way, roughly speaking, let's say 6,000 feet down, and then they're going to run this steel the next however long that is, whether it's a 1 mile or 2 mile long laterals. The third piece of the puzzle is the tubing. This is what's placed in the hole, and this is actually what fluids are flowing in. They put a pump, the pump is inside here. So that's a general wellbore construction, steel and cement, telescoping down, one inside the other. So next. The next piece of the puzzle is kind of our review. How do we do that review to tell where those aquifers are? So we have worked with our sister agency, the Division of Water Resources, and our GIS system. Hard to see in the network of wells in the heart of Wattenberg, but you can see some blue dots. And of course you can see the red and yellow dots of the various producing wells. So what we'll do is we'll use our GIS system around a well, a permitting well, and we'll do a 1 mile radius. So we'll look for all the oil and gas wells and all the water wells within a 1 mile radius. And then we can do a list dump, and we can get all the producing formations, and we can get all of the water well depths. So we can dive in and look how deep are all those water wells. So the point is, what is the usable aquifers? So the next piece is we have another tool we can use. We can use all the electric logs. These are geophysical logs that the operators give us. And they're looking for the electrical resistivity of the rock. And we'll see this kind of character. It's a classic Fox Hills character, kind of a blocky sand, and it transitions. If you're a golfer, you might go to Fossil Trace, and that sandstone that's there along Highway 6 on the west side of Golden, that ridge line right there is the Fox Hills, if you want to know what it looks like. But we'll get that, then you can see a kind of a sand shale transition zone. So right here, we'll make sure we're 50 feet below that as a minimum on these surface casing. So next. So ideally, what we've created, again, is this telescoping set of steel and cement to isolate this zone. And 317 is our main drilling rule. And all of that has several things, and one of the keys is that 317J that I think is extremely dynamic. It requires that all wells need to have the strength to handle any anticipated pressure. So if an operator is going to hydraulically fracture that well, that's the anticipated pressure. And so this steel down here is designed to handle that applied pressure. I did take some graduate classes from Dr. Fleckenstein, and believe it or not, that's one of the final test questions.
You got it right.
Now, if you saw, we're looking down in the hole. So you can't, it's not something you can physically touch. I can't touch where that cement has been placed. So what I'm going to do is use what we call a cement bond log. It's an acoustic log. So we all know if we've dropped a pipe, you can hear it ring. Well, that's what they're, in essence, that's what they're doing with the cement bond log. So this section right here is an amplitude. And we can see as it increases along here, it's got a high amplitude. So it's getting that ringing sound, a high amplitude. As soon as I grab this and hold it, you can't hear anything. And that's why we have, sorry to keep pointing at you, Matt. So here's a low amplitude, and here's another form of testing that same thing where we have a low and high amplitude. So that is one of our ways to get our eyes down into the hole. So next slide.
What happens if that bond log is bad?
Great question. I'm glad you asked that. So there's two parts to our permitting process that Jane talked about. Part one is the permit. An operator is going to tell us what they're going to do. So it's just like you guys in the city. They give you a construction set of plans. This is how I'm going to build this building. This is how I'm going to develop this site. Then they provide as-builts. Well, we get that through our Form 5. They tell us exactly how they built that hole. Many documentations. They show us the invoices of the cement, so volume of cement. So we've got that annular space, we can do a volume calculation of how much cement. We get the cement bond log. If it's not built correctly, we will contact the operator and say, you're missing, before you start producing this well, you gotta fix that.
Can you tell us how they fix it, or is that a really long conversation?
Well, yes and no, but simply, there's varieties of ways you can do that. You can go down in and poke a hole in this steel. That's not necessarily your first choice, and that's why operators want to do it right. But you can poke a hole in this steel. You put a seal down here, a packer, and you can pump your cement down. It pushes against that packer or the seal. It's kind of like a bladder that sticks out, and it'll go back out through those holes, and you can get that cement in. That's one way. If it's near the surface, we call it a 1 inch. So you can take a 1 inch round pipe, and you can put it down the back side and get it in that way, and you can place it. That's probably the first choice one would do. But, so there we go. Next.
Quick question. My understanding is extractions, horizontal wells, they're doing production casing, almost full TD. Do you require cement bonding all the way through wherever it is? And then do you require the logs to do 100% the cementing?
What I'm going to look for when I look at that cement bond, when you get horizontal, it gets a little bit difficult to run that down there, down through the lateral. The key that we want to see is that cement in the vertical part of the hole, because that's where you're going to get, if you did, that's where we would get the fluid migration or pressure migration up through that vertical part of the hole. There's two tests we can do. One is what we call a mechanical integrity test, and one's a Braden test. And what we're doing is we're looking at, with a mechanical integrity test, you can put, we fill this full of water, and then we apply pressure on top, and we're looking for this steel to have integrity. I like to analogize that with your bicycle inner tube. You fill up your inner tube, it's full of that air pressure, you stick it in a bucket of water, and you're looking for those bubbles. What those bubbles represent is a pressure leak. So in this case, we're going to fill this full of liquid, we're going to apply a pressure and put a gauge on there, we're going to look at that pressure gauge. What I just said was, how do I look down in that hole to tell integrity? Pressure are your eyes into the hole. If I see pressure rising, then that's telling me something's coming into that space. If I see pressure falling, that's telling me something's leaving that space. So pressure your eyes into that hole. The next piece is this other space between the surface casing and the production casing, and again, I can actively put a gauge on there, and in this case, I want to monitor that pressure. Ideally, I want to see 0. So I want to monitor that, and again, the same thing. If I have a rising pressure, then that's going to tell me something's either coming in from this side or from this side, which I don't want. And of course, if I have pressure declining, that's telling me something's leaving that hole. So pressure are your eyes into that hole to tell if you have integrity. Next. So what you saw in those pictures were numerous of older vertical holes, and those were the D and the J that you were talking about. And so those are deeper. So we're weaving these horizontal between these existing wells. Part of our review is within 1,500 feet, we're going to review all of those older vertical wells to make sure they were built correctly and built in a manner to protect that aquifer and to isolate the production of that Niobrara. So, next slide.
Before you go too far from that, are you going to be also making sure that the horizontal lines are not going to be intersecting?
Yes, we have a rule for that, 317S. R and S kind of deal with it both.
Okay.
So, so what I'm trying to depict here is I've got my horizontal well and I'm hydraulically fracturing, so I'm applying that pressure, and I want that pressure to stay in this formation. I also don't want that pressure to impact those adjacent wells, so I want to make sure I have cement coverage over the Niobrara, and I want to make sure if that older well that cement is placed over the aquifer. Next. So here's a depiction of that same thing. So I've got my the two cases. I might go look at an old well. It doesn't have this. We're going to discuss with the operator placement of cement there. I don't have this aquifer covered, and so we're going to get cement in those two locations.
Just before they frack that well.
Before they frack that well, exactly. So next one. So that's a condition of approval that we'll put on the permit. So we'll do our review. We ask the operators to do that review so that they have an understanding before. Then we do that review, and then we put a condition of approval on a permit that you cannot hydraulically fracture until this well is remediated, and we've got a documented policy. So here's an example of a well, the blue line. There's the 1,500-foot review that we would do and assess the quality of those wells. And then when they hydraulically fracture this well, any well that's in 300 feet, we're going to ask that you monitor that Braden head space. So we want to monitor while that treatment is occurring, so we don't have any uphole pressure from that during that hydraulic fracture treatment job. Next.
When you say we, you are talking about the operator.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think I take a little ownership because I care. It's more like I want to see that these wells are built correctly and that